All right. Thank you everyone for coming to the last HPL seminar of the, I guess, 2022-2023 academic year, or at least the academic year of the HPL. So today will be the last one, and then we will resume the first Thursday of classes in September. So I think it's the first or second week of September, but of course you'll receive an email beforehand, just like you do if you're signed up for the current listserv. If you're not signed up for the listserv and you want to receive emails about them, please just send me an email and I'll add you to it. So today it's my pleasure to introduce Raina Crawford. She is a master's student under the supervision of Darren's definition. She completed her undergraduate degree in biomechanics at the University of Calgary in 2021, and she began a master's degree with Darren that same year. She's scheduled to defend her master's in fall 2023. In between working here, Raina's done a lot of internships. She's done 2 internships at Garmin in sport. I know one is in algorithm development. What was the other one? Sport product testing? Product performance. And she just returned from a practicum at Adidas in Portland. What was the department? Athlete Sciences. Excellent. This I pulled off the cuff here. So aside from her work here at Garmin, so of course you can kind of tell the trend that she wants to work in the sports industry as a biomechanist, or sporting goods industry, I guess. These are 2 distinct things. So she's kind of obviously setting herself up well, and her topic today is, just in line with everything else that she's interested in. If you don't know about Raina, she played for the Dinos basketball team for 6 years, making the project presumably very close to home for her. Aside from in school, doing internships, she enjoys spending her time hiking, bouldering, doing any sort of outdoor activities. So we won't thank her yet. We'll thank her at the end, but I'll turn it over to her, Yeah, exactly. Hold that on your, I'm sure it will be great. All right. So today, Raina will be talking to us about lateral wedged insoles and basketball movements.
All yours. If I'm just talking like this, can you hear me okay in chat? All right, yeah, thanks, Michael, for that. That's great. Like you said, I've been researching lateral wedge insoles and basketball movements for about 1.5 years now throughout my master's. And again, to provide some more context to my research, I did play basketball for 6 years, and so my passion for sport and for performance really drives my overarching research question of how can we make basketball players perform better. So before we get into that too much, let's first take a look at basketball as a whole. So in basketball, it's fast-paced, multi-directional, bunch of movements like shuffling. We have running and sprinting movements, as well as jumping. Now, if we look at a basketball game, we see a change in these action every 2 seconds. So it highlights the fast-paced, intermittent nature of the game. And if we start to look at the frequency and the ratios of these movements, shuffling accounts for about 40 to 60% of all the movements that we see in basketball. Now, just to focus on the shuffle movements, shuffling is a lateral movement where you stay perpendicular to the direction of travel. And it's characterized by a series of small little steps. It's often as a reaction to another player. And with these movements, a bunch of changes of direction. So with these, we're seeing a braking phase followed by an acceleration phase. And somewhere in between, we have a change of direction of the center of mass. Now, to facilitate these changes of directions, we start to get a misalignment around the ankle. To focus on the ankle biomechanics for a moment, a large part of ground reaction force development comes from ankle plantar flexion muscles. So when we go into this misaligned stance from the change of direction, we're starting to see a decrease in the plantar flexion moments, and that leads to a decrease in the overall ground reaction force development. So if we're trying to optimize performance, although we're starting to get a decrease in these plantar flexion moments because we want to change directions, that can hinder our sports performance. So this kind of led my first question of how much how much does it impact it? How much does the frontal plane joint angle affect the peak plantar flexion moment? So to take a look at this in a controlled environment, I asked 20 subjects that were free from a lower extremity injury on the testing leg to come into the main lab downstairs, and on the Cybex, I tested the plantar flexion torque. So here they were in a seated position with the bent knee, and then measuring the torque about the ankle joint. Now to do this, the Cybex isn't able to rotate in the frontal plane and measure the plantar flexion torque. So using this foot plate here, I tested 6 different conditions. Between the ankle in a neutral position, 10 degrees of eversion, and then 10, 20, and 30 degrees of inversion. So now with this foot plate, if this is the neutral condition here, with the line of axis in shown in orange, with this foot plate, I was able to rotate it to different degrees while still being able to measure the plantar flexion torque of the ankle. The resulting curve looks like this, where we have duration on the bottom, and then we have the torque represented by the curve. The dotted lines represent the start and the end of the trial. So the trial lasted 3 seconds, and with this, I took the middle 50% of the curve as the average torque. So I averaged the values in the middle of the curve and used that as the value for that trial. For instance, went through 3 trials of each condition with plenty of rest in between. So with these average peak sagittal plane torques, or plantar flexion torques, I ran a one-way repeated measures ANOVA to analyze and seek out any differences between the 6 conditions. As a result, you get this figure here with the 6 conditions on the x-axis and then the average peak torque on the y-axis. So as expected, the neutral condition had the highest torque, whereas as we start to deviate away from its neutral alignment, there is a decrease in the plantar flexion torque. There were significant differences spread out across all conditions, with a 25% reduction in plantar flexion torque once we get to 30 degrees of inversion. So as a result, this proved what I had said before, that the peak plantar flexion torque decreases as the ankle alignment moves away, as the ankle moves away from its neutral alignment. So knowing that, and talking about now another piece of changes of direction, we need to take a look at ground reaction forces. So we have a resultant ground reaction force during change of direction movements, and during lateral movements, we start to see significant portions of vertical ground reaction force as well as medial lateral ground reaction force. Medial lateral ground reaction forces are essential to changes of directions, and so contrary to linear movements where they mostly need vertical ground reaction forces. Research has found that greater medial lateral ground reaction forces are correlated with faster changes of direction, as well as increase in acceleration. If we are to keep the overall magnitude of the ground reaction force the same, although change the ratio of the medial lateral and the vertical ground reaction force, effectively this will change the direction of the ground reaction force vector. A vector that's more aligned with the medial lateral plane can be beneficial for performance, and so that's what we're going to be kind of focusing on today. So as a summary so far, we see that nonlinear movements are common in basketball, and this can lead to 2 things. First, being due to the misalignment of the ankle joint, there is a decrease in the ankle plantar flexion moments, as well as there's a need to generate the medial lateral ground reaction forces. So this brings up the question, how can we reorient the ankle and produce these medial lateral ground reaction forces. So if we take a look at banking, we'll start with taking a look at an external bank. A study by Up and all in 2014 took a look at 10 subjects when they performed a V cut and a side shuffle movement on a lateral bank. So underneath this bank here is a force plate, and they measured kinematic and kinetic variables during while they're on flat ground, when they're on your 10-degree lateral bank, and a 20-degree lateral bank. Results of this study showed that compared to the flat surface, the 10-degree lateral bank led to an increase in the medial lateral ground reaction force impulse, as well as an increase in the lateral flexion angular impulse, as well as a decreased frontal plank angle. Now, in a similar way, another study by Schroeder and al. 2021 looked at the use of a baseball base at the banking surface. And in this context, they found the exact same results. So we took a look at external banking. Now, if we take a look at wedged footwear, so now we're actually implementing this into footwear. A study in 2012 took a look at maximum effort sprints along a circle, a counterclockwise circle. So with this, it tested two conditions. One being the control, just normal shoes, and the second being a wedged footwear condition. So here, as it was a counterclockwise turn, the inside leg had a medial wedge, so that means that the medial edge of the shoe was higher than the lateral edge. And then the outside shoe had a larger lateral edge and a smaller medial edge. Now, when we look at the wedge footwear in comparison to the control in the study, similar results were found as previously stated. There was an increase in the medial lateral ground reaction force. There was an increase in the average plantar flexion moments, as well as a decrease in the peak plantar, the frontal plank angle. These results combined led to an increase in speed by 4.3% overall for the study. So when we look at these two banks, it looks difficult to implement this into a basketball court. With these, you can only run in one direction, and it's be a hazard if you were to implement these all over a court. So to look at a different way, look at banking in a different way during, or if you look at the literature, I guess, another form of banking can be seen as lateral wedged insoles. So the lateral wedged insoles are just an insole that's in your shoe. They're still flexible. And at the back, if you look at the posterior aspect of the shoe, we see an increase on the lateral aspect of the wedge. Now, so far, these lateral wedged insoles have mostly been related to research concerning knee osteoarthritis patients, as they aim to reduce external knee adduction moments. If you look at this picture here on the right, we can see that still this lateral wedge has a sort of a bank in it. So again, quick summary so far. We know that as the ankle deviates from its neutral orientation, peak plantar flexion goes down, as well as if we know that banking and wedge footwear can alter ankle alignment favorably, and lateral wedge insoles do the same. So that's the driving question behind the second study. This purpose of this study is to determine the influence of lateral wedge insoles on performance of basketball-specific movements in male and female collegiate athletes. So for this study, I had 24 subjects, 12 female and 12 male. They were either all current or recently former collegiate basketball players. And they were all free from any chronic or current lower extremity injury at the time, and they had not had any ACL reconstruction surgery. For the footwear, I used a low-cut Nike basketball shoe. I had them in 5 different sizes to accompany or to be able to accommodate the range of athletes. And with these, I had 2 conditions. The first being a control condition, and the second being a lateral wedge condition. For the control, the shoes were in their natural state. In comparison, the lateral wedge condition had the natural insole of the shoe removed and the lateral wedge insole replaced. All the lateral wedge insoles were able to accommodate or fit the size of the basketball shoe. So again, if you look at a lateral wedge insole, top view down, it looks the same as if you were to go to a store and take out the insole of your shoe right now. Differences are when we start taking a look at it from the frontal view, we see an increase of the edge on the lateral side. And in this case, for this study, I had a 5'3" lateral wedge. The wedge ran the full length of the insole, and it tapered past the MTP joint to be more comfortable for the participants. These insoles are stiff compression, although still flexible and axial and longitudinal bending. And as we had seen before, from the posterior view, we can see a banking effect or a lateral bank with these insoles. For my data collection, I took a look at 3 movements: a shuffle, forward, and sprinting drill. For the shuffle, participants started between a set of timing lights facing perpendicular to the direction of travel and stayed that way the entire time. They weren't allowed to cross over. They weren't allowed to turn their shoulders. So for this, they started again in the middle, went towards the force plate, landed on their left leg, returned to a marked spot on the floor, and then they did that process again. Force plate, marked spot, and then finished through the timing lights to end the drill. For the forward cutting drill, participants started 7.5 meters away behind the force plate and off to the right. They performed a series of 5 45-degree cuts, alternating between left and right leg, with the left leg being the third cut on the force plate. Timing lights were set up at the start and the end of the drill, measured total time to completion. And last, for the sprinting drill, participants started 5 meters away from the force plate and performed a linear sprint through a set of timing lights, and then hit the force plate with their left foot. For all these movements, participants performed 5 successful trials, and order of the movements and the conditions were all randomized. Now on to some data collection methods. I collected kinetic and kinematic data of the left leg and the pelvis, as well as the time performance. For my data analysis, I used Visual 3D, and within that, I normalized the stance phase to 101 points, as well as normalized kinetic and ground reaction forces by mass. For the stats analysis of 3-dimensional joint angles and moments across the stance phase, I utilized statistical non-parametric mapping with a 2-way mixed models ANOVA with repeated measures on one factor, where the between factors are between subject factor was the sex, and then the within subject factor was the condition. Based on the results of the ANOVA, post-hoc analysis was conducted. For the analysis of discrete values such as stance time or the time to drill or the drill performance time, again, a 2-way mixed models ANOVA was ran in SPSS. So as a result of the time performance, there was no significant differences between the control or the lateral wedge condition for the shuffle drill, the forward, or the sprinting. We move on, starting to look at some ground reaction force ratio results. So again, these are the results from the medial lateral to vertical ground reaction force ratios. So we start by looking at the shuffle drill. We get this big graph here. So let's break it down. We have the percent of stance phase on the x-axis, and then on the y-axis we have the variable of interest, which in this case is the ratio. The black curve here represents the mean of all subjects in the control condition, and the red curve represents the mean of all subjects in the lateral wedge condition. The bar on the bottom represents the percent of the scan space that there is a significant difference between the two conditions. So in this case here, we see that there is a significant increase in the medial lateral ground reaction force to vertical ground reaction ratio with the lateral wedge condition from 17 to 72% of the scan states. This result here correlates to a decrease in the overall stance time for the drill by 4.6%. For the forward drill, we see no differences in the between the lateral wedge and control position, and it's the same story for the sprint drill. Oh, it's not the same story. For the sprint drill, actually, sorry, I took a look at the linear aspect. As this is a linear movement, we take a look at the anterior posterior ground reaction force instead of the medial lateral ground reaction force. We see that there is an increase in the anterior ground reaction force with the lateral wedge condition as compared to the control condition. Now again, as this is the ground reaction force, it is normalized by the body weight. So we have the AP direction ground reaction force on the y-axis. And then on the next graph, we can take a look at the ground reaction force in the vertical direction. So here, we're seeing a shift to a greater anterior posterior to vertical ratio of the ground reaction force, which indicates that there is a greater, the vector is more orientated in the direction of travel. And it's the same story for the shuckle drill. The vector becomes more orientated in the direction of travel, which is in the medial lateral direction. We move to the ankle inversion results. So starting with the shuckle drill. So now on the y-axis, we have the ankle frontal plane angle, where negative denotes inversion. And here we see no differences with the ankle angles during the shuckle drill. And we see a similar result during the forward cutting drill. Again, inversion is negative. There are no differences between the lateral wedge condition over the control condition. In this case, positive angle is denoted by eversion. And so here, once again, we see no differences in the ankle frontal plane angles. Now, when I saw these results, it took me a second, because I thought the inversion wedge, or the lateral wedge put the foot at 5 degrees of eversion. So I thought that I would see a correlating response in the ankle frontal plane angles. Now the ankle angle is created by the angle between the rear foot and the shank angle. So instead I went to go take a look at these the shank angles. So if we are to go take a look at the shank floor angles in the frontal plane. So these graphs represent the angle of the shank relative to the horizontal. So here, again, stance stays on the x-axis. And then we have the shank angle relative to the horizontal on the y-axis. So now, between the lateral wedge and the control condition, we're seeing that the lateral wedge has a decrease in the shank angle for 19 to 44% of the stance space. Similar, although less for a short amount of time, significance, the forward drill also sees a decrease in the shank angle from 55 to 63% of the stance space. And for the sprints, there were no significant differences between the shank angle, between the control, or the lateral wedge condition. ankle moments. On the y-axis, we have the ankle sagittal plane moments, again normalized by body mass, where negative is the plantar flexion moment. With the shuffle drill, we have no significant differences between the control or the lateral wedge condition, and that's the same for the forward drill. Yeah, same for the forward drill as well as for the sprint. So taking this all in together, we saw that lateral wedged insoles can lead to a greater non-vertical to vertical ground reaction force ratio. We saw that with the shuffle drill and the sprint. Next, looking at the ankle, there was no differences in the ankle inversion angle, although we saw changes in the shank angle. Now, one thought behind this is that the lateral wedge insole condition may allow additional range of motion for the shank, and thus the decrease in the shank angle. And last, there was no changes in the ankle plantar flexion moments. So, where to go from here? I used a 5-degree lateral wedge for this study. There are no other studies that looked at the use of a lateral wedge in its basketball context. So I'm not sure what the optimal wedge is. Perhaps the optimal wedge may be smaller, it may be larger, or it may be even bigger. As well as different movements need to be defined or observed, such as cuts at different angles perhaps, or different drill start types. Maybe it's from a jump landing and then it starts the drill. Maybe it's from rotation start the drill, or a standstill then start the drill. Taking a look at different types, as well as unanticipated movements. Again, basketball is very, on defense is very much a reactionary sport. You're reacting to another player. And so it'd be interesting to see how this impacts the results. Further, future direction is look at a functional group analysis. So taking group A versus group B and forming an analysis in that way. With some data that I had, I took a look at a functional group analysis with the shuffle, in the shuffle movement. And so to set this up, what I had done is I had taken the percent change between the drill completion time, between the lateral wedge condition and the control condition. With that, I divided the groups into divided the subjects into 3 separate groups using an unsupervised k-means clustering. And so that divided the participants into either a non-responding group, a no change group, or a responding group. So with that, there was 8 subjects that were deemed to have been non-responders, 7 that had no change, and then 9 that were responders. So with these groups, between the non-responders and responders, I performed the same analysis for the shuffle movement. So if we are to take a look at the same results as before, although with the functional group analysis, we see here that the non-responders, in terms of the ground reaction force ratio, had no change in their performance no change in the variable control and the lateral wedge condition. Where the responders had a significant increase with the lateral wedge condition for all but 20% of the stance space. Next, moving on to ankle inversion. Here, non-responders, again, no change as we had seen previously when I looked at all the subjects. In comparison as well, there was no change in the inversion angle of the responding group as well. So once again, took a look at the shank angle. And with this, again, responders, no differences between the control and the lateral wedge condition. Although in the responding group, you do see, again, a decrease in the shank angle in the lateral wedge condition as compared to the control condition. And last, let's take a look at the ankle moments. The non-responders had, again, no change in the ankle moments. And here we see, we don't see any significant differences within the responding group. Although we do see a characteristic difference that occurs between the two groups here. So from this analysis, as a summary, the responding group saw greater medial lateral ground reaction forces, differences in shank angles, and only a slight increase in plantar flexion moments, although not significant. So the next part of this is why, and that's the future direction to take, is why do the responders have differences between the two conditions, whereas the non-responders do not? Is it perhaps based off anatomical differences? Could it be preference? Do they just like the shoes more or the wedge more? Is it a playing experience, or could it be injury history? These are all questions that I have and hope to look into in the future. From this, some key takeaways. Banking can improve performance-related variables during lateral movements, such as shuffling, which is a very common movement that we see in basketball. In terms of lateral wedged insoles, they can create a lateral bank that alters the medial lateral ground reaction forces. Although future research is needed into how lateral wedged insoles can improve time performance in basketball movements. I'd like to say thank you to the definition group and who reforms lab. Thank you to everybody that helped me out with my study. Thank you.
All right. Floor is open for questions. So who would like to get us started? Jordan.
Okay. Unslouch myself, sir. Why do you think the lateral insoles functionally change the anterior posterior ground action force so much in a forward sprint?
And the forward sprint.
I wasn't expecting to see that large difference.
Neither was I, and that's where there were slight insignificant differences in the center of pressure. So I don't know if it was a difference in where the force would be applied, although there were no differences in kinetics so that's something I definitely want to dive more into, because big picture I don't know, but I think that's a very interesting thing.
I guess it's a good thing if it's not detrimental to a wedge in a sprint. Like when you were presenting your movements, I sort of thought, oh, the sprint's going to be the bad guy, where bad stuff's going to happen.
For sure.
But that wasn't.
And that's definitely why I wanted to include it, was to make sure, shuffling's only a part of it, because you have to run forwards. So I want to make sure that that's not going to be that performance as well.
All right, Tim.
They're related to that, so I can imagine that in a sprint, the anterior posterior force changes quite a lot, where initially you're mostly accelerating, so it's in the forward direction, and then later you're getting that impact as well. So, and you showed just one trait, right? So that's an average over the entire sprint.
Yeah.
How well does that represent the entire sprint? And also maybe you can go back to that slide. What are the directions? So what is the positive direction? Is it the forward or the backward?
To answer your first question, I don't think that step is representative of the entire sprint. I don't think it's representative of the start of the sprint, as they had the time to build up their speed and up until that point. But after the first 3 steps, I would think it's representative of the other ones. And then to go back to this one here.
Yeah.
So in this case, yeah, the positive is the anterior force.
Okay, so you don't really see that impact then, because, well, I think that when you first strike your heel, that you get an impact that's in the posterior direction, right?
And for this movement, I'd ask them to sprint like you're sprinting, like to get as back as fast as you could. So in this case, there is no heel touch. They're on their toes, pushing the entire time.
Okay.
Brent, what did you use for the k-means cluster analysis? What variable?
The percent change in drill performance time between the two conditions.
Oh, okay. Oh, interesting. Okay. And then the other question that I had is, you never really talked about whether or not there was a sex effect, but you had men and women.
Yeah.
Or gender effect. Sorry. Was there an effect there?
And so that.
And then how did that shake out in the k-means cluster analysis?
I'll start with the K-means one, because that was easy. It was actually very balanced. Like in the responding group, it was 5 to 4. I believe 5 males, 4 females. So it was balanced. And same for the non-responding group, very balanced between men and women. As for gender differences, yes, I did calculate them. I'm not presenting them here today. Although in terms of subject like variables such as the ground reaction force ratio, ankle inversion, and ankle moments, there are no sex effects. There are mainly sex effects only in the ankle non-sagittal plane moments, such as the frontal plane or the transverse plane moments.
And then one other question, your study 1, where you manipulated from a plane angle, your manipulations were 10-degree increments.
Correct.
But then you chose a 5-degree insole.
Yeah.
Why didn't you choose a 10-degree insole?
Based off some previous literature, a 5-degree insole was said to still be comfortable to wear, but still be able to elicit the biomechanical responses. So that's why I chose that one. Anything bigger than 6 was said to be uncomfortable for participants. And so that's where 5 degrees felt like a good level.
Okay, I'll ask some questions. First one with in the dynamometer test, why a bent knee rather than a straight knee?
So I was going between the two, and as I wanted this to reflect fastball movements where most of the time you are flexed, I chose the bent knee position around 60 degrees, as that tends to be when the peak ground reaction force happens.
And did you specifically choose a low cut shoe, or is this just something that happened with the shoes you got?
I didn't specifically choose it now, but I'm thankful for it, as I didn't want any sort of restriction around the ankle joint. So if I had the choice, I would choose a low cut shoe, but for this, I did not.
Do high cut shoes actually influence the frontal plane biomechanics like significant degree, or is it just?
I think some research would suggest that. I've come across some papers. I can't say I've dived into them too deep. I know I just like low cut shoes because they're just more comfortable personally. But that's where I think that they may have some effects as well.
Venus.
So I actually missed it, but you have the same subject do the control and then do the match.
Correct. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So the other thing is that about the injury, so possibly the injury, could you look at the rest of like you discuss the results based on that?
Oh
And
yeah.
then what happens to the knee when you're doing this and the lateral wedge? What happens to the knee if there's a change in the possibility of injury and anything like that?
So I'll start with the knee. So I haven't seen any differences. So I haven't analyzed the rest of the results as well. There are no differences in the knee mechanics in terms of for these 3 movements in the frontal plane or transverse plane in terms of the angles or moments. So I don't think there's any chain reaction up into the knee. At the ankle joint, there is differences in the transverse and frontal planes. And so that's something I'm looking into now is the impact on injury and if this has a detrimental impact or no impact or a good impact.
Ashley?
My question may be a little bit stupid, but the groups that you divided people into, there were non-responders, no change, and responders. How is the non-responders going the opposite direction, or how is that different from no change?
Fair. Yeah. So non-responders, their time was slower with the lateral wedge condition compared to the control, whereas the responders had a faster time with the lateral wedge compared to the control. And the no change, they maybe had like a 0.6% change, so that was not included.
And so then I'm wondering, because the numbers look very well divided in non-responders and responders.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, do you feel comfortable saying that the lateral wedge is beneficial for performance in that case, considering half of them showed a decrease in decline?
Anecdotally, yes, I would have put that on paper quite yet. Like it is promising, but I do think I need to dive a bit more into also, like again, the injury variables. Do the responders respond well, but then also does it impact negatively in an injury aspect? So I think that's where I need more research. But for now, it's looking pretty good.
And then last question related to that was, do you think if you maybe had like a smaller wedge, because you said 6 was the max that they suggest based on previous literature, do you think maybe a smaller wedge could have been beneficial for those guys? Or do you think it would still be no wedge that's best for them?
That's interesting. I'd be interested to find out. Like other researchers using 2 and 3 degree lateral wedges found absolutely no change anywhere. But I would be interested to see if they ran a functional group analysis such as this, if they would find a group of people that did respond. Possible, but perhaps not likely as it's only, it's smaller than 5 degrees is pretty small.
I just wanted to follow that up because, you know, in the old-fashioned statistics, when you find a third of the people are lower, a third don't change, and a third get better, you know, then you say there's no difference, you know, like you take an aspirin for headaches, and for half the people, well, for a third of people it gets worse, for a third of people it stays the same, for a third of people it gets better, and then, you know, this invention, I think that Dr. Nick had about 25 years ago, is that you then talk about responders and non-responders. And I only accept that if you did the test with the same subjects a month later, then another month later, and you see that the people who were responders are still responders and those that didn't change. And so I guess the question is, did you do that? And do you actually have response, or do you just have an arbitrary distribution where you arbitrarily make 3 different groups?
I did not do repeated like visits or anything like that. It was one session. So yeah, no, I did just have the one data set arbitrarily divided with the k-means clustering into 3 groups.
Because when you have no effect, that's what you always will find. You know, some people are a little higher, some don't, and some are a little lower. So I think that's always dangerous. I think when you really want to talk about responders, I would always suggest that do the test a month later, it's the same subjects, and see if it comes out.
That's an interesting, yeah, I like that.
That way. Because otherwise, in every statistic, everything that you measure, you will have the results that you have. Then you take the response, and then yes, they will show a significant difference. The other thing that I was curious about is when you talked about sprinting on this 2.5 meter circle with the wedge shoes and without, and so then you need a lateral ground reaction force go bigger with the wedge shoes, and so I guess when you think about that 3% centripetal force, which is equal to the mass times the speed squared, tangential speed squared divided by rho is 2.5. So your mass is constant, your rho is constant. So that means these people must have run faster. You really wouldn't need to measure the ground reaction force. You can just see, can they run faster or not around the circle?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Or?
Yeah, that reflects the results of the study. There was an increase in sprint performance as well as the centripetal ground reaction force.
kind of, if they did it the same way and ran around that circle in the same way, then that would have to be, because that centripetal force, that lateral ground reaction force, really then only depends on the speed that they run. You run faster, it's more. You run less fast, it's less.
Yeah.
So, the other thing I was wondering when you talked about the plantar flexor moments, did you do that for, like, I know you have different eversion, inversion angles. Did you also do that at different plantar flexion, dorsiflexion moments?
No, and that's where I'd be curious to do that again. I set the ankle to 90 degrees of plantar flexion to have a consistent angle, but no, I didn't take a look at different angles of plantar flexion.
The reason why I'm saying that is because, I think there's about, 3 reasons why the force gets higher or lower in some of the conditions. One is that somehow by changing the joint angle, your activation is different, and people have shown that sometimes activation of muscle depends on the joint angle, but you didn't measure EMG.
No, that's not.
The other thing is that your muscle length changes when you go from eversion to inversion, so it could purely be a muscle length effect. And if you have tested at different plantar flexion, dorsiflexion angles, then maybe you could see if that potentially might be the effect, that it's a matter of the muscle lengths, why you get different amount of force.
Yeah, like try it at extreme and then yeah.
And then the third one is just simply that the moment arm changes, so that when you go from eversion to inversion, you try to assess what the plantar flexor moment arm might be of your plantar flexors in the different eversion inversion positions.
No, I didn't assess any sort of moment arm. I took the values.
I'm really curious that happened, and I'm trying to figure out. I think those are maybe the 3 primary reasons that I can think of that might be cute to try to figure out where that comes from. I
read some research as well, trying to figure out exactly what is it, and there didn't seem to be one answer. I read a study that looked at the moment arm in ankle inversion, or it was looking at the moment arm, the plantar flexion moment arm during ankle eversion and inversion, and it saw no change in the moment arm. Although I did think that could have been a possible reason. So that's where I'm trying to find other papers that kind of say the same thing, or if that was a one-off. Because that's where there isn't one conclusive reason as to why.
That's good to know. I mean, if you look that up and they seem to be about the same, then maybe it has nothing to do with moment arm.
Yeah, could be muscle. Yeah, for sure.
The other thing that that anterior posterior graph, I guess that's just one step on the platform, but the people did multiple steps.
Correct. Yeah. They started about 5 meters away from the force plate, and then I took just one step on the force plate.
Because if this was representative for all steps, then you would think, well, the anterior posterior impulse is bigger, and therefore the speed should be bigger, and the speed change should be bigger if they started from scratch, from 0, and they should be running faster. But then I saw that this is actually normalized to stance time. So could it be that the force is higher, but the stance time, the absolute stance time is lower, and therefore the impulse is actually the same, and therefore you wouldn't really expect a bigger change in the anterior posterior velocity?
I understand what you're there's no significant differences in stance time.
So stance time is about the same. So then this
exactly
roughly represents the impulse.
Exactly. The only change in stance time was during the shuffle drill. The other movements stayed the same for stance time.
But then the average speed, the average time taken was about the same. Right?
Exactly the same, yeah. And that's where, as I kind of mentioned, future directions, does it impede performance if you start from a standstill and then go? So perhaps the start of the drill is slowing you down over the total time.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, maybe in the first couple of steps it slows you down, and then later on, in advance, you get the bigger impulse there.
So that's where I would like to see what the first step would look like, and definitely a future direction.
I just wanted to note here is that there's only significant difference very early, and although later there seems to be a bigger difference, there's no significant difference. So it probably is that there's a lot of variation going on there, but that's not actually a real difference.
At the start and
At the end, so at the end, there is,
yeah,
you can see there's a difference, but that's actually not a difference because of big variation, right?
the standard deviations are actually, I can show you after I have the graphs with the standard deviations as well. And that's where they're relatively close for all the movements. But I have to chat a bit more about
So,
that.
but if there's not a lot of variation and there's a lot of difference, how come there's no significant difference?
And that's part of the non-parametric nature of this stats analysis, is that it loses some robustness with the results.
But did you actually test if the power, the impulse? The
yeah,
impulse was bigger for red compared to black, rather than just the force at any given instant in time, just the area under the entire curve.
No, I haven't checked the impulses for the strength movement yet. No.
But because that's what I was looking at. I was not looking so much that it was significant, or I was just really looking at the curve. The red curve seems to be higher all the time, and therefore, presumably, you would expect that maybe the impulse would be bigger if it's significant or not. That's the question.
Yeah, fair. Yeah. I'll have to look at that. I've done the impulse analysis for the shuffle movement, and there were no significant differences there, but I haven't looked at the sprint movement yet.
The other thing that I didn't quite understand, I think it was in the forward rounding where you looked at the ratio. No, it was not forward. It must have been a curve rounding where you looked at the ratio of that medial lateral ground reaction force over the vertical ground reaction force. What test was that again? I forgot.
So all three of them I looked at. Or no, sorry, just the forward and the forward looked at that ratio as well as the shuffle movement.
And so, yeah, and so then, the ratio, of course, could be bigger, let's say, because the medial lateral is bigger in one condition compared to the other, and the vertical is the same, or it could be that the medial lateral is the same, but the vertical becomes smaller. When you have a ratio, you don't really know if both of them change to give you the change.
Yeah.
Or did you look at that at all?
Yeah, I did analyze the individual ones, and for this movement, there was a significant change in the medial lateral ground reaction force, but not the vertical.
Okay,
And
so
so-
the ratio change came because of the medial lateral.
Yeah, and that's where I wanted to highlight the relationship between the two,
Yeah.
not so much the.
And that's this, eh? Okay.
Yeah.
Is that this? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So, could you look at any immediate performance effects during the change of direction step? Like, for this one, did you look at the center mass velocity?
Yes, I did look at that, although there's no differences in the center mass velocity. The only real difference between the center of the center mass was the position in the vertical direction. With the lateral wedge position in this, just meaning that they got into the lower stance, but no differences in the velocity. Which I thought was interesting though, as the decreased stance time went down, although no differences in the velocity.
Just a follow-up. So in the shuffle, when you show the ground reaction forces, and is that an average from both legs, or is that just one leg?
Just the left leg twice.
And so the left leg, when you go to which side? When you go to the right?
Yes, so you're coming in on the left and then going this way.
Or that? Okay.
Okay, I have one question back to the statistical parametric mapping. What's the rationale for using it as opposed to just?
Fair, and that's where I wasn't sure if there'd be any. I wanted to take a look at the entire standard space as opposed to just peaks or in and on the average of the mid stance, just to give a more full picture view of what is happening in these wedge conditions. I don't know if they're going to impact injury, so I wanted to take a look at the touchdown phase, the mid stance phase, and the takeoff phase, as opposed to just, oh, this was the peak, but it happened in the start of the stance phase, and now I know nothing about the end of the stance phase. So that's why I chose.
And then you look at these frontal plane, like foot ankle variables at the ankle joint or the talar crural joint, but most supination and pronation of the foot occurs in the subtalar joint. So what's the rationale for assessing, ankle talus movement versus subtalar talus or subtalar calcaneus?
For me, that was looking at a performance point of view. You read it, it's about the ankle movement. It's about the ankle. You look at injury. Basketball has super high rates of ankle inversion injuries. So I want to assess what is happening at the ankle joint more so than the subtalar.
Any other questions for Reynold? Yeah.
More online.
Okay, we'll go here and then.
It's just a silly question, but at the first study, you said you studied six conditions, right? But the conditions here are evasion 10 degree, right?
Yeah.
Neutral 10, 20, and 30, right?
Yeah.
So where's the sixth one?
Got to change the slide.
Oh, thought I missed something.
I actually did do 6. I also tested the lateral wedge condition at 30 degrees of ankle inversion. But just for flow and consistency of this, I didn't put the data points in there. Thanks for bringing that up. I appreciate it. But yeah, no, and that's where I did test the lateral wedge condition at 30 degrees of ankle inversion as well. In the shoe.
So,
This one's from Zachary Barnes. So the foot markers on the basketball shoe as opposed to on the foot.
Oh, of course you said that. They were on the basketball shoe.
He said, if so, does that change how you interpret the results, given that you can't be sure what the foot was doing?
There. I think that's a difficult question. I think in terms of the study, I don't think it would have been too feasible, as I wouldn't want to impact the integrity of the basketball shoe itself. But in terms of the results, as the shoe, it's basketball shoe, it's a sporting shoe, so there isn't much movement in the shoe anyways. I don't believe it would impact the results significantly.
sure, Andrew.
But wouldn't it then, that'd be why you wouldn't see a difference in the ankle angle, but you saw a difference in the shank angle? Because you put a lateral wedge in the shoe, it's inside the shoe, so the shoe orientation doesn't physically change. What's changing is the orientation of the foot.
Correct.
And that would lead to the shift in the shank. That'd be why you didn't see a foot, like the ankle angle change, but you saw the shank angle, the ground change.
So you're saying that because the lateral wedge is in the shoe,
And the markers are on the shoe.
the markers are on the shoe, correct? But to create the neutral trial, the markers go on the foam on the skin. That's a low cut shoe. I can put it directly on the ankle malleoli. So that's where, in reference to the body, the ankle joint or the tracking markers for the movements would be in reference to the ankle joint during the static neutral trial. So that's where I'm not sure if that would have an effect.
Rena, considered looking at the hind foot angle, the rear foot angle, and the global coordinate system too, and then you can tell with whatever is changing.
Yeah, I looked at the rear foot forward angle, and there was no differences in that angle, just angle.
Can I play just devil's advocate and just make a comment to maybe Zach or whatever? I don't hear us, but like, I mean, to me, the most important results are the reduction, the improvements in performance that you get, and the changes that you see in the medial lateral ground reaction force. And those interpretations are agnostic to whatever happens at the subtalar joint, to whatever angle the shank is. and all that, well, they're agnostic, that doesn't mean they don't depend to some extent on this. So for me, if somebody asked me that question, especially for the staff, I would say no, it wouldn't change my interpretation of the, of what you can do with a lateral wedge.
Yeah, I mean, but this isn't, I mean, I know this is the human performance lab, but we are kind of scientists and we need to derive mechanistic understandings of what's going on,
So
right?
you're gonna derive a mechanistic understanding of what's happening in a ground reaction force measurement
No, but
from
you
a
can-
shank angle?
You can know that muscle momentons change with subtalar joint angles. We'll let Walter speak after, yeah.
I have to say something because when that question came, I thought really curious what she says. Is she gonna try to say what she said? Because I was thinking, I knew this was gonna go down a rabbit hole as soon as the question came. My answer would be, oh, it probably would change it a little bit. Do you know how it would change it? No, I don't. I haven't measured it. Done. Because I knew as soon as I gave the answer, this is never, ever gonna end, and it could have been so easy. I just said, yeah, it probably would change it a bit. Yeah, but I don't know how. So sometimes, because you haven't measured it, so you don't know the answer, and so it was so funny because I knew what you would answer, and I'm going, oh my God. That's when you answer questions for 40 years, when you just say,
I
oh,
don't
yeah,
know.
it probably will be different,
All right, we'll end the seminar with Walter's sage wisdom. So, let's thank Raina again.